Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Taylor, and this is Josh. We are coming to you live from the Josh's Frogs break room in Owasso, Michigan. This is a live Q&A session. You're going to ask the questions, and Josh will give you the answers. We're coming to you live from Facebook, Instagram, and we plan on recording the session to post on our YouTube channel at a later date. So we'd like to ask you, if you're on Facebook right now, please give us those likes, give us those hearts. Feel free to share this stream with anybody who you think would enjoy watching this. And we also would like to ask, if you're watching this from YouTube at a later date, go ahead and like our channel and subscribe. And I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Taylor. I work digital marketing here at Josh's Frogs. So I'm the one who does a lot of the social media. I manage the Facebook page, Instagram. I do the Instagram stories a few times a week. If you guys are on Instagram, feel free to hop on. You can see all kinds of cool stuff behind the scenes on our Instagram stories that I do a few times a week. I also do our newsletters. I help get sales around and all that. But enough about me. You guys are here for Josh. How are you doing today, Josh?
I am doing great. I'm a little bit nervous. You guys have done some of these Facebook Lives before, and I have not been a part of them. And you guys did some awesome work, and I'm a little bit nervous about how am I going to level up on against some of these other guys on staff that know a lot more about animals than even I know, and so I'm excited about it.
Awesome. I'm sure you'll do just fine. We got an easy question. So I actually did ask you guys to share some questions on social media a few days ahead of time so we could have some ready. Make sure you ask them live as well. We'll try to get to them. If we don't get to them live, don't worry. He'll answer them afterwards. Our first question comes from Facebook. Angie Moreno asked, what made you do what you do? Any inspirations?
Well, there's a really long story to that, but I'll just say that I grew up in Jackson, Michigan, which is home to a lot of swamps. And my mom was a firm believer that boys needed to get outside, away from the video games and out playing in the swamps and in the ponds. So she'd make us go outside all spring, summer, and fall, and we'd catch all kinds of frogs and snakes and turtles and stuff like that. And then she was kind enough to let us keep them overnight every now and then replace them. So it started at a young age, really involved in those kind of animals. And then I started keeping some exotics in high school, some, of course, the ball pythons, some turtles, that kind of stuff. But never thought I'd make this my career. It just kind of happened after, got out of college, and it just kind of happened. That passion that I have for connecting with nature and helping other people connect with nature just came back around, and was lucky enough to start Josh's Frogs and see it grow.
Very cool. Elizabeth Atina from Facebook asked, what's a good starter frog? I have newts, but have never had frogs, and I'm planning on getting some soon.
That's a question that a lot of people will ask. We're pretty famous for doing poison dart frogs. It's something that we're really passionate about and something that we do a lot of. And we do recommend poison dart frogs for people to start off with. They kind of had a reputation a few decades ago of being very difficult to keep, but once you set them up properly, they are really, really easy to keep and really easy to take care of. If you're looking for something even easier than dart frogs, maybe especially families with really young kids want something a little bit lower maintenance, Pac-Man frogs work out really, really well. The setup is really simple, the setup's really cheap, and they're a little bit more forgiving on conditions. They're just a much more hardier frog from an area that sees some kind of extremes in temperatures and that kind of stuff, and they're a little bit more forgiving to people learning how to take care of frogs. So I recommend that if you have young kids, that kind of stuff, starting with Pac-Man frogs. But if not, then I definitely recommend the poison dart frogs. Just really easy to take care of once you set them up properly. And right nowadays, there's tons of videos, blogs, that kind of stuff that help people set them up properly, and then they're really, really easy to take care of.
Okay. Tied in with that, from Instagram, we had a question come in from Renee XOXO2338. She wonders, is a tree frog a good beginner frog?
Ooh, well, part of it's a personal preference. A lot of the tree frogs are nocturnal, of course, and I feel like having a frog that's awake during the day just makes it a little bit better of a pet. So from my standpoint, a personal preference, I don't recommend as readily some of the tree frogs as I do some of the dart frogs. Especially for me, I'm a father with young kids. I want my kids engaging with the tree frogs. The other part of that tree frogs kind of get a bad rep is that most of the tree frogs being sold are actually wild caught frogs. And so, they were caught somewhere in the wild, moved to the port, probably stayed there for a few days, and then they get shipped up here to the United States. And, they start off, almost behind the eight ball a little bit as far as health-wise. And so I think the tree frogs have kind of a reputation for being a little bit more difficult to keep. But that's why, we at Josh's Frogs work on captive breeding these species. So when people get a hold of some of these tree frogs, they're much more hardier than they would be coming off of a long boat. And in those cases, they do make really cool pets. But, from my standpoint with young kids, my kids want to see frogs moving around, and, nocturnal tree frogs just aren't doing a lot during the day. So, but I guess a couple exceptions to that would be milk tree frogs. And the yellow spotted climbing toads. Those are frogs that are much more handleable. So they might be sleeping all day, but you can get them out, hold them, interact with them that way, and that makes really, really good pets. That you necessarily can't do that with dart frogs. You can't be out holding your dart frogs around. So.
Okay, and another thing children like is watching the tadpoles grow into froglets. So that ties into our next question. Carlos Delgadillo from Facebook had asked, what's the hardest tadpole to care for in your experience?
The hardest one to take care of is always the new species that we're working with. Most people don't realize this, but like tadpoles' mouth structure varies quite greatly between different types of frogs. So you have tadpoles that might have a mouth that's designed to scrape food off of a smooth surface. Sometimes you have a little bit of a kind of a suction type mouth for sucking stuff in. Some tadpoles have very large mouths that are used to eating very large things. Other ones are mouth structure is kind of up and towards the top, so they're used to getting stuff off the top. So there's how you take care of tadpoles from one species to another is always drastically different. And so sometimes when we're working with frogs, we'll do as much research as we possibly can, looking at what's available scientifically, what's available information-wise from zoos and other hobbyists, but sometimes there's just not a lot of information. And it takes us a while to look at the structure of the tadpoles, do as much research as we can about that area, and try to figure out how best to take care of these the tadpoles and learn how to take care of them. So I guess a roundabout way to answer that question would be the hardest one is always the newest one, is always the hardest one.
And we're always learning here. It's pretty cool to see all the new species we're dealing with.
Yeah. A big part of our animal people's tasks have to do with research. We're always trying to find scientific papers on some of the frogs that we deal with. And, a little behind the scenes backdoor knowledge, I guess. A lot of people see a lot of different people breeding frogs. Most of us, in fact, probably pretty much all of us, are in communication with each other and talking, sharing what's going on because, in our industry, there really isn't a lot of competition for frogs. We're just not producing enough frogs to sustain the demand for those. And so we'll talk with other breeders about here's where we had success, here's where we didn't have success, and learn from each other so that we can provide frogs because, a lot of us are in this because we're passionate about connecting people with nature, and we want as many people to have that opportunity as possible. And right now, for most frog species, we just can't produce enough for the amount of people that want to keep those types of frogs.
Very cool. All right, well, guys, it's Josh's very first time being live. Give us those likes, give us those hearts. Let us know you appreciate us going live. You can click that turn on button that you should see. It's a little gray button. You can be notified every time we go live so you don't miss any in the future. And if you're watching from Instagram, go ahead and share our stream and give us a like on there as well. All right, that leads to our next question. That Marine Bio Dude from Instagram says, how do you personally go about using information about the wild ecology and habits of the species you keep and breed to their captive husbandry? And how important for you is peer-reviewed literature to this process?
It's very important. A lot of the frogs that we deal with, don't have a ton of research behind them. But when we can find, especially peer-reviewed stuff like that, that's super helpful for us in allowing us to have much better, quicker success with some of these species, and even to some extent looking at sister species or cousin species and be able to look at the research behind some of that tadpole care or frog care can help us give us some insights or clues on how best to take care of the frogs that we're currently working with and trying to breed. So it does play a large part, and I would love for it to play an even larger part. It just isn't as much research as we'd like on some of these frog species. And so in essence, sometimes we're in essence creating that research and the ways in which we publish. Here's here's how we were able to breed these frogs, or here's the things that we tried and didn't work as well as some of the other things that we tried, and be able to share that with other people. We're in essence creating some of that research.
And if you guys are familiar with Josh's frogs, you know we're not just frogs. We have all kinds of feeders and plants and so much more. So that ties into the next question from Moni Chavez. She said, are you thinking about adding silkworms?
We have really expanded our insect offerings over the last few years, and our goal is to carry all the different feeders that people would be looking for. So yes, silkworms are on our plate. Hopefully later this year we'll be selling those, and we're developing a food for those right now. We really want to be the one-stop shop where people can get everything they need to take the best care for their animals. At Josh's Frogs, we really believe that variety is the key to long-term health for animals, and being able to offer people as many different types of feeders as possible.
Sounds good. Again, if you guys are just joining, please feel free to share and like our stream. Give us those hearts. Josh is doing a great job here answering your questions. This is Josh, the man himself. Meg Lindsay has a question she asked on Facebook. What new species are you working on breeding that are not yet available, and what should we look forward to?
Well, as all things, that's always something that we're really focused on, is bringing on new species. That especially became apparent to us this last winter with some of the talk about some of the possible bans for wild-caught frogs coming into the United States. Kind of put us and our team on a quicker path and beginning to work with some of those species. And so this year, I believe we'll release some of the largest numbers of different species than we have in years past, just because we were concerned about availability of those animals moving forward. So glass frogs we're working with, a bunch more reed frogs that are pretty much not very common captively bred, but come in a lot wild caught, that we've had really good success with. Especially blue-black reeds and starry night reeds we've had a lot of success with. And so we've begun working with some other reed frogs, which I think are just really cool frogs, and that they, they're kind of distinct looking. There's a lot of different varieties of reed frogs, but make really good captives, have a really cool call that I think will become very popular and great. When we go back to beginner frogs, that those guys are really forgiving. Have usually like a water type bottom, and then a terrestrial landscape that they can climb on, and they make really good desk type pets. And so I'm looking forward to those. Maybe not as popular as some of the other frogs, but definitely something that I'm passionate about. We also are working with a lot more reptile species. We'll be releasing crested geckos, gargoyle geckos, tons of other geckos as well over the course of this year. We got Phylomedusa. We have 4 different species that we're working with right now that we hope to be released this year. A lot of stuff, a lot of different animals this year.
Very cool. Tied into that, Shane Taylor would like to know, why do thumbnail dart frogs and regular-sized dart frogs need the same amount of vivarium space? So I know there's a misconception, because the thumbnail dart frogs, if you don't know, are the small ones that only reach the size of your thumbnail when they're full grown. And there's a misconception that people can keep those in a tiny enclosure.
Okay. I think part of the reason that's a question is because we have communicated, and when I say we, I mean the hobby itself has communicated the kind of the spoken rule of 1 frog for every 5 to 10 gallons. And we've kind of framed it as a minimum. And if you talk to anybody that's been doing frogs for any length of time, they'll tell you that the larger the enclosure you can get, the better it is for the frogs. And so I think part of that has to do with the fact that thumbnails tend to be more commonly kept by people who have kept other dart frogs in the past. They tend to be more experienced keepers, and they've caught on to that truth that the larger you can make the enclosure, the better off the frogs are going to be from accessibility to food and escapability from food, but also temperature swings, the buildup of waste in the tank. It's just a lot easier to keep the frogs, and the frogs tend to do a lot better the more space that you can give them. So I guess that's kind of where that confusion stems from, but I'm always a firm believer that the more space you can give to the frogs, the better.
Sounds good. Polly Dema asked the golden question on Facebook. Are you ready for it, Josh? Why did the frog cross the road?
I wish I had some witty answer, But I guess to give you the real answer, there's only two reasons a frog would ever cross a road, and that's because there's more food on the other side of the road, or they want to breed on the other side of the road. That's the only two things that drive frogs to move or do anything is just breeding or eating. So
They cross the road to get high quality feeder insects here at Josh's Frogs.
Exactly.
So let's move on to some of our live questions you guys have been asking. Feel free to keep them coming, and please also like and love our Facebook stream. Share it with anybody you think who would find this interesting. Jose Ramirez has a good question. What is the best way to keep moisture in a new vivarium?
That's a good question. One of the things that I believe people do when they first set up terrariums is not add enough water to the actual terrarium. And that usually happens from one of two ways. One is just simply not adding a bunch of water, or two, when they're adding water, they're pouring water into the vivarium and it's going straight into the false bottom, the drainage layer of the tank. So when I set up a terrarium, like I just did in my wife's classroom a few weeks ago, I like to put the initial water in using a spray bottle. What that allows me to do is to really wet all of the stuff in the tank, but it also cuts down on the speed at which the water is going into the terrarium, so that the substrate of the terrarium can really soak up a bunch of that water so it just doesn't flow through into that drainage layer. So I'm a big proponent of taking your time when you're setting that up and really spray down that tank so that a lot of the moisture stays there in the substrate of the tank, because it'll take a little bit while for those plants to settle in and start respiring and raising the humidity that way. So when you're first setting it up, it's really important that you keep the humidity high, and especially if you're introducing frogs right away. One of the things that'll stress a frog out like nothing else is being a little bit even on the dry side, in the dry side of safe. So when you're putting new frogs in there, you're going to want to, especially when you're talking about poison dart frogs, keep the humidity on the little higher side, help them recover from that stress of being transported or shipped or whatever that is. But definitely spraying it down helps to get that initial humidity boom that you're going to need.
And we do have a good blog on that as well. One thing Josh has done for the community is created a wealth of knowledge. So if you go to our website, you can access all of our blogs. Go to the how-to guides. It's a little tab right on the right corner of our website at the top. Has all of our blogs there. You can also go to our YouTube channel and subscribe to our channel. We have all kinds of how-to videos there. And I know there's a good misting blog on there as well as much more. All right, let's see what other questions we have coming in here. James Simmons, do you ship dart frogs to Canada?
It's hard to believe, but Canada is like less than 2 hours away from here. Just by driving, we're really close to Canada. Unfortunately, due to the laws and regulations, of different countries, it is very difficult to ship frogs across that artificial line that we've drawn in the dirt between the United States and Canada. Makes it pretty difficult. So we do some larger shipments into Canada. We work with some people that will then distribute the frogs, but it's not something that we do a lot of. And a big reason for that is that it's just a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of headache, whereas right now most of the frogs are shipped here in the United States because it's just easier.
All right. Charlie McDonald is wondering, I have always wondered the best way to heat tropical frogs. I kept frogs a long time ago, and we used incandescent lamps with red bulbs, but I'm sure technology has advanced.
One of the drawbacks to using incandescents like that on top of a tank is it tends to dry out the tank. And so while you're getting the frog the right temperature that it needs, you tend to on the flip side, lower that humidity. So we do have speaking of blogs, we do have a great blog on that. By far the easiest, if that's possible, is actually heating the actual room up to a acceptable temperature. If that's not an option, then we recommend, especially like for poison dart frogs, putting what are commonly referred to as under tank heaters, putting those on the side of the tank. They're very low wattage, ranging from like 4 to 20 watts worth of heat, and putting that on the side of the tank to raise the temperature of the tank a little bit. But yeah, for the most part, if you're looking to solely for, hey, I'm trying to heat a tank, using incandescents tends to dry out the tank a little bit. But on the flip side, there are some frogs that will actually need that hot spot. White tree frogs are a good example. The Pachymedusa Danny colors, those kind of frogs that actually like it a little bit warmer and will actually do a little bit of basking, we'll need some of those incandescent bulbs. But on the most part, especially you're talking poison dart frogs, putting that incandescent bulb is just going to dry out the tank, and also does run the risk of making it too hot in there. Some of those bulbs, 100 watts, where you think of a heat pack or heat under tank heaters, between 5 and 20 watts worth of heat.
Sounds good. Hope that answers your question. Robert says hi from Atlanta, Georgia. How's it going, Robert?
Hey, Robert, I was just in Atlanta.
We have Jose from New York City.
Never been to New York City.
I haven't either. It would be fun. And we have Randy from Nebraska. How's it going, guys? Please make sure you like, love, and share our feed. We'd really appreciate it. Alexandra Coleman asked, do you breed frogs? We breed a lot of frogs.
Yes, we breed tons of frogs here. We specialize in poison dart frogs, but we do a whole bunch of other tree frogs and toads, and then we do some lizards as well, and then we do a lot of insects.
All right. Paula Matney says, any chance of ever seeing bumblebee toads again in the hobby? I know you guys are breeding them, but my impression is that it's pretty slow going.
Your impression would be very, very correct. We've had some early success, and especially with breeding wild-caught bumblebee toads. But what we're finding is that the young bumblebee toads that were captive bred are needing quite a bit longer to sexually mature than what we had thought in the past. And we also think that we might not be stimulating them the correct way, that we might be missing a part of that because we're not getting as much success as we were able to get with the wild-caught parents breeding. So we're still working on that. I think it goes back to the questions on research and what's available. There isn't a lot of hobby knowledge base on breeding captive bred bumblebee walking toads, and anybody who did have any success, we're all doing it with the wild-caught parents, and so we're still learning on that and still experimenting with that and trying some new things to get those guys cycled to be able to breed. But definitely a frog that I really enjoy. I just any frog that has an odd quirk about it really intrigues me, and just the way that those guys walk. Like a dog instead of doing their jumping is just pretty amazing. So definitely something we're working with, and wish that we could have a little bit more success on getting them to cycle up.
Sounds good. Justin says hi from Huntington University. How's it going, Justin?
Hey, that's where I went to school.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Awesome. Maybe you know Justin. Clint asks, why do people recommend raising tadpoles separately?
The issue is that for poison dart frogs, the issue is that they'll eat each other, or at least nibble on each other. In the wild, a lot of the dart frogs, especially thumbnails, are eating unfertilized eggs from the mother or their younger brothers and sisters to survive. So to maximize the amount of dart frogs that you're producing, you'll want to separate the tadpoles out. But if you're not interested in producing a lot of tadpoles, keeping them all together and allowing the larger ones to eat the smaller ones is the way that it would happen in nature as well too. So.
All right, sounds good. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Please like, share, and love our stream. We'd really appreciate that. We have one other question we are going to end. Calvin Darling says, what is the best way to grow mosses and ferns? They do like moisture. They like a lot of moisture and a lot of light. So I know mosses can be tricky in the vivarium. Sometimes we try to grow them and they die off. Sometimes we don't try to grow them and they sprout up randomly. Same thing goes for ferns. So
yeah. I think one of the things that people don't realize about mosses is that there are a ton of mosses. I think we tend to think of like, oh, there's a few different types of mosses. There's like tons and tons of different types of mosses. And the issue is that most of them, it doesn't seem intuitive that they would need this. A lot of them need a lot of bright light in order to grow. We tend to think of them as, hey, they're kind of in a shaded part of the forest, but that shaded part of the forest has a lot more light than what we're typically doing inside of a terrarium, so they need a lot of light. But like you said, like the best way is to get as many natural plants in there and allow some of those hitchhikers mosses to go crazy inside the vivarium. So
Sounds good. All right, thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate your questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question live. That is okay. We will get that answered after our live session. Josh, you did a fantastic job. Thank you on behalf of the whole hobby. Thank you as an employee for helping bring nature into people's homes. We really appreciate it. We hope you guys enjoyed. Have a great day.
Thank you.